The wrestling world has lost some giants this year. Terry Funk passed away this week. The Iron Sheik, superstar Billy Graham, Jerry Jarrett. But there were two names we lost far too young, both in their 30s, both having accomplished so much in a relatively short period of time. And yet they had a lot more left to do on this earth and in the ring. That was Jay Briscoe at the beginning of this year. And this week it was Bray Wyatt, which had me at a loss for words when I first heard the news on Thursday. Bray Wyatt sat down for an interview 6 years ago. And he was the WWE champion at that time. He was getting ready to go into WrestleMania as champion for the first time against Randy Orton. And he was talking about promos and how his promos connect with the fans. And he tries to be different, and he tries to do things in a way that nobody else does them. And he had that quote that he said where when he goes out there, it's because he wants to deliver something special. He wants to give the people something that nobody else does. He says, "No one does me because no one else is me. That will be my legacy when I die, hopefully." 24 hours after the news broke of Terry Funk's passing, Triple H posted a tweet. It said, "Just received a call from WWE Hall of Famer Mike Rotunda, who informed us of the tragic news that our WWE family member for life, Windham Rotunda, also known as Bray Wyatt, unexpectedly passed earlier today. Our thoughts are with his family, and we ask that everybody respect their privacy at this time." Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful, a little while later on Twitter, posted that he was given permission to reveal that earlier this year Windham had gotten COVID, and that exacerbated a heart issue. And there was a lot of positive progress towards a return in his recovery. Things were looking up. And unfortunately, on Thursday, he suffered a heart attack and he passed away. And he was only 36 years old. He had 4 children at home, 2 daughters from a previous marriage, and 2 kids with his fiancée, JoJo, a 4-year-old little boy, 3-year-old little girl. He and JoJo were planning on getting married later this year. And the whole thing is, even as I sit here now, and I've talked about this a couple of times because I went live on YouTube that night just to talk about it and let everybody know what was going on, because there were people who still didn't know. They were first learning the news about what had happened, and they didn't know what to think and what happened and how to feel, and they were upset. So it was good, I think, just to sort of hang out a little bit on Thursday and just talk about things. And we had SmackDown last night and more Bray tributes. But even now, as I sit here, it still just feels very surreal when we were just reading not more than a couple of weeks ago that he was doing better. And in fact, they were starting to discuss possible ideas for him creatively, that he could potentially be back on television as soon as September. And then for this to happen is just a punch to the gut. And one of the first things I thought of after I heard the news and I started to process it was Brody Lee. Brody Lee was another member of the Wyatt family, a very good friend of Bray's. Luke Harper, he died 3 years ago. And he was a little bit older, but he was only 41 years old. He was only 5 years older than Bray was at the time that he passed away. And I know how much that impacted Bray because he was very open about that. It's the reason why he never wanted to go back and said he would not be going back at any point to portray the old Wyatt family Bray sort of swamp cult leader character, because he felt it would be disrespectful to his friend to not be here and not be a part of that. But what's scary about, hearing about COVID and what it led to with him is that Keith Lee almost died. Keith Lee went through some hell himself and missed a lot of time in WWE for reasons that none of us were aware of, because at the time it was being kept very hush-hush. Only later on did he come out and talk about what happened. He almost lost his life. He had a really rough battle with COVID. And thankfully he came out okay on the other side of it. But, he tweeted this week, he said, "The toughest part of this industry is when you bond with people. And then that bond is severed unexpectedly." He said, "Rest in peace, brother. I was rooting for you just like you did for me. I already missed you, but it's painful. Safe journey, my man." even more eerie was about 8 months ago. It was at the very end of last year, so it would have been December of last year. Barry Windham, who was Bray's uncle, suffered a massive heart attack. And Bray posted a video shortly after Barry had the heart attack, and he was in the hospital, and he was okay and stable, but there were a lot of people very concerned about him, and Bray posted a video as himself, and he said, at the time, normally I keep a lot of my outside life separate from anything that I do here or in the ring. I just wanted to let everybody know that I am incredibly grateful for the support and love that I've received since I have been back and throughout my career. Wrestling has been a part of my life always. And when I was a kid, I looked at my dad, my uncles, my grandfather, who were all pro wrestlers. I looked at them as if they were like Greek gods, like they could not feel pain. They were immortal. They would always be just like that. As we get older and I become a man myself, you start to understand that's just not the case. Nothing is forever. This week, my uncle Barry Windham had a massive heart failure in Atlanta and went down and did not have a pulse for 10 to 20 minutes. He was gone. I want to thank that one specific man, Michael Todd Lalick, who was there, a random citizen. He gave him CPR throughout that entire time before everyone else and the EMTs could get to him, and he stayed with him. And he's the reason that we still have Barry. He is alive. He is with us. Be good to the ones you love. Always remind them how much they mean to you, because nothing is forever. Thank you for everything. Barry Windham is still with us. Bray Wyatt is the one who is no longer with us due to a heart attack. And that is just, it's almost too eerie for words. And even some of the words that he himself said there in that statement about not taking things for granted and cherishing the ones you love. And then here we are, 8 months later, 9 months later, to be in this situation is almost inconceivable. But he had been away since February with an illness that, again, was kept very close to the vest. At first, people didn't know if it was an injury. Then it became an illness. Fightful is the outlet that reported earlier this month that the illness was both career and life-threatening, but that he had improved significantly. He was closer to being medically cleared to return to the ring. They were just being very, very cautious before clearing him because they wanted to make sure that, 110% everything was okay. Mike Rotunda himself, even in an interview with Bill Apter at one of the wrestling conventions only a few weeks ago, was asked about Bray, and he said, look, don't believe a lot of what you read online. I'm sure he will return to WWE, hopefully shortly, and then we will go from there. And unfortunately, that did not happen. He has not wrestled a match since the end of February. That was at a house show against LA Knight. And in fact, the last 8 matches of his career, most of which were live event matches, but also included the pitch black match at the Royal Rumble. The last 8 matches all came against LA Knight. And LA Knight is the person that they tabbed to speak about Bray Wyatt prior to the main event on SmackDown last night. SmackDown last night turned into a dual tribute show, mostly to Bray Wyatt, but also to Terry Funk. But they had all of the wrestlers come out on stage at the very beginning of the show. Triple H was right there front and center. And to Triple H's left was Eric Rowan, who they flew in for the show. To his right was Braun Strowman, the final 2 remaining members of the Wyatt family. And Eric Rowan is, the last remaining member of the original Wyatt family. Eric Rowan was flown in by AEW to be part of the Brody Lee tribute show 2 years ago. And I remember just the emotion and the pain that he wore on his face. Here's this big, hulking guy, and he is just absolutely destroyed. And it was obviously very emotional. And then to see him there again, back in the other company, not part of the roster, but they fly him in for another tribute show, and he is standing there with his eyes closed tightly, thinking about, God only knows. Here he is again in this situation. It's awful. And that moment where there's this embrace between him and Braun, and just, it's just one of those things where you hear the expression, life can change or be over in an instant, and don't take things for granted. And when stuff like this happens, it really does drive that point home. Here's a 36-year-old athlete who was here one day and gone the next, and that just should never be the case. You know, you have 4 kids now, 4 young kids who now are going to grow up without a father. That should not be the case. It sucks. It's unfair. Doesn't make any sense. I thought LA Knight did a hell of a job on his promo. I thought what he said about Bray and the way that he described how Bray helped him, because there was a lot of divided opinion about that feud and about their pitch black match at the Royal Rumble. I was not a fan of it. I was pretty vocal about that. Still was not a fan of it. But you look back on that now, where LA Knight was at the beginning of this year and where he is now. Where did that change begin? Where the fans started to really get behind him? Because only a few weeks before WrestleMania, that's where you really started to see and hear the crowds come alive for LA Knight. Well, that doesn't happen if he isn't given the chance to show himself, show more of his personality during that feud with Bray Wyatt in the lead up to the Royal Rumble. So whatever you thought of the match itself, that was the first time that we had a real opportunity here in WWE to see LA Knight, not Max Dupree or some watered down version of him. And so he credited Bray with that. And in his promo, he even said, sometimes your greatest foes turn out to be your greatest helpers. And I thought that was very appropriate for him to go on television and say that. But I thought overall WWE did a very, classy job with how they handled that show last night. It was tough to watch, especially the 10 bell salute and then the video package for him. And throughout the show all night long, they had these very brief Bray moments that they would show for about 10 seconds each. They would show highlights of the original Wyatt Family vignettes and the moment he won the WWE Championship, the debut of the Fiend, his return last year at Extreme Rules. So I thought that was nice. The empty rocking chair they left on stage with the spotlight shining on it after the opening segment. That was a nice little sad but kind of beautiful moment, I thought. When I think of Bray Wyatt, everybody talks about how creative he was. And clearly he was. I mean, his mind worked in ways that a lot of people's minds just do not work. And sometimes it could be his own, undoing, because even in his own words, it was hard for him sometimes to kind of just keep all of his ideas organized. He had so many of them. And you saw it with the Fiend stuff and the Firefly Funhouse. A lot of that stuff, if not all of that stuff, came from his mind and came from his imagination. But it all goes back to, when he was trying to figure out, what can I do to get over? What can I do to create some sort of character that I can connect with the audience with? Because he was doing the Husky Harris stuff, and I remember in those days when he was still in developmental, he was wearing a mask at one point. He was trying different things, and it just wasn't really clicking. But then the Wyatt family happened, and he hit on something with that. And those original vignettes, down in the swamp, him with the hat on and the Hawaiian shirt, and Rowan and Harper as sort of his minions. It was a case where I was waiting for them to be brought up to television, and then they finally were. And we had, of course, two things that stand out to me about those early days of the Wyatt family. When I think back to 2013, 2014, Daniel Bryan joining the Wyatt family against his will. But joining the Wyatt family, it did not last very long. It was actually a pretty short-lived angle, all things considered. But the moment that it built to on Raw, when they had that tag team match with the Usos against, I think it was Bray and Bryan, and they lost, and we had that moment inside the cage after the match, where it just looked like Bryan was going to just sort of surrender himself like he did every week to Bray and eat the sister Abigail, but he pushed himself away, and the crowd came alive. And when Bray went to attack him, Bryan just went off on him. And it was great because Harper and Rowan are outside the cage. They see what's going on. They're trying to get in. It was almost like Bryan set a trap. And he is just going off on Bray. This crowd was losing their minds. And Michael Cole had a line on commentary about Daniel Bryan shedding the skin of the Wyatt family. It was this great moment, one of the great moments in Raw history. But I also think of the Wyatt family and the Shield. And by the way, on the Bryan stuff, and I mentioned this the other night, one of the best matches if not the best singles match of Bray's entire career, came out of that at the Royal Rumble in 2014 against Daniel Bryan. Bryan gave him, I think, the best match of his career, at least as far as singles matches. I have to put that little qualifier there because what I was going to say is what came shortly thereafter, I think the month after, was the Wyatt family and the Shield coming together for the very first time, and what magic those two teams had before they even touched. You can feel the crowd was into it in a very big way. When they had that first match at Elimination Chamber, the holy shit chants before they even touched, it was something very special. And they had, I think, about 3 matches, maybe 4, but I think they had 3 matches. But the Elimination Chamber match in 2014 is one of my favorites. And then he had the WrestleMania match with John Cena. He had that great entrance in New Orleans, and then he lost. And I think creatively that was a very big mistake. And there were a lot of mistakes that they made with the Bray Wyatt character, who should have been more protected than he was. He would talk a big talk, and then he would have these big matches, and he would lose. And that's why I came up with the nickname, he's the Eater of Worlds. He's the Eater of Pins. Because Bray Wyatt was compared so much to The Undertaker, which was very unfair to Bray because nobody can fill those shoes. But The Undertaker was, not that he didn't lose. The Undertaker really, he got screwed over quite a bit, especially in those early days of the character. They would bring in these heel monsters, and Undertaker sometimes would get screwed over. But he was protected in a way that Bray Wyatt character was not. And I wish that he was more protected, because who knows how things would have turned out. So he was just eating pins left and right, and it was a joke there for a while. And then a few years later, they had the storyline with Randy Orton, when Randy Orton joined the Wyatt family. And Luke Harper didn't trust this guy, right? Because he's a snake. Didn't trust Randy. He was the only one who saw it. Bray didn't see it. Harper didn't see it. Or Rowan, I should say. But they won the tag team titles, and of course Orton ends up trying to burn down the entire family. That's when Bray won the championship in the Elimination Chamber, which was an excellent match. Immediately turned around a month later, 6 weeks, whatever it was, and dropped the belt at WrestleMania to Randy. But then we get to the early days of The Fiend, the debut of The Fiend, and the Firefly Funhouse, which was quite trippy. First time that we laid eyes on those puppets, I didn't quite know what to make of it, but I was kind of digging it, because it was something unique for sure. I think unique is a good word for it. But that was all from his mind, all from his imagination, and he went through these moments, whether it was Hell in a Cell with Seth Rollins, which was a complete debacle, and I know they had other ideas for what they wanted to do in that match, and they were overruled by Vince McMahon, and then we ended up getting, honestly, one of the worst matches that WWE has ever produced on pay-per-view. And you cannot lay that all at the feet of Seth Rollins, you cannot lay that all at the feet of Bray Wyatt, but that did not work out the way that they had intended. But he did end up, later on, winning the Universal Championship, and then it's almost as if they didn't know what to do with him. So they had Bill Goldberg beat him a few months later in Saudi Arabia, they got the belt off of him. The Fiend was pretty much cooked at that point. At that point, the aura and the mystique of the Fiend character was dead after Goldberg got a hold of him. But then, 2020, they release Bray Wyatt. And that was a shocking release. And eventually, he did make his way back to the company, but it was after Vince McMahon had stepped aside, at least for a little while. Triple H took over. And that's when we heard, Bray Wyatt could be on his way back, because Vince McMahon had soured on Bray and supposedly thought that, there were elements of his game that he was not a fan of, and he didn't think a whole lot about him, and all these rumors about what Vince McMahon may or may not have thought of Bray Wyatt. All you have to do is just look at the fact that they let the guy go, right? If he saw superstar in Bray Wyatt and he liked Bray Wyatt, he wouldn't have fired Bray Wyatt, but they did. Triple H brought him back. And they brought him back. They had the whole White Rabbit campaign with the QR codes, and that was a big success for them. He showed up at Extreme Rules, got the massive ovation, and then he showed up on SmackDown the following Friday. And he stood in the ring for the first time as himself. That was basically a Windham Rotunda promo, but still calling himself Bray Wyatt. This was not cult leader Bray. This was not Funhouse Bray. This was not Fiend Bray, who didn't speak. This was the realest version of Bray Wyatt that we ever had the chance to hear from on television. He came out and said, "This is me. Genuine me for the first time. I lost my career. I lost two people who were very, very close to me. And I lost my way. I got to a point where I thought that everything I had ever done here was all meaningless, that nothing I ever did mattered to anyone. And I was wrong. Thank you. You all saved my life." And I never forgot those reports that came out at the time, after Bray had been let go, about people shit-talking him behind the scenes in WWE and the things that Vince McMahon supposedly thought about him. Remember the reports about how, Bray, he was a, I don't know if troublemaker was the right word. Not troublemaker, but he was difficult to work with, right? That's usually the go-to line when somebody is having issues or speaking up about something, or they let somebody go and everybody is all upset. And all of a sudden, these reports start to leak out about how they were difficult to work with. So if I saw those reports and you saw those reports, then you know that Bray himself was sitting at home reading those same reports. And how must that have made him feel? To see everything that he was trying to do, everything that he created, and now it's being torn down, and then there's people talking behind his back and talking shit about him. I'm sure that messed with his head. I'm sure that didn't make him feel very good. So when I look back and I hear those words from that promo with him talking about how it felt like everything I had ever done was rendered meaningless, that's the sort of thing that he probably was thinking about. But it was the fans that brought him back. It was that reaction from the fans and the love that they gave him that made him realize that it wasn't meaningless. That everything he had done was not for nothing, and that it meant something to someone. It actually meant something to a lot of people, based on the reaction that he got when he first came back. And that was the best promo of his career, because it was real. There was real emotion in that promo. And that's the Bray Wyatt that I was looking forward to seeing more of. And unfortunately, we never had the opportunity to see that, because the story veered off into the Uncle Howdy stuff, and they were doing more of kind of the mystical, supernatural type stuff, and they never had the chance. He never got the chance to finish the story. We talk about Cody and his story. Bray never got the chance to finish the story. I don't know if we would have seen that version of Bray on a more regular basis on TV at some point, but it's unfortunate that we never had that chance. So when I look back on his career, it definitely was not for nothing. He accomplished a lot in the time that he was in the company. And I think also it's fair to say that there was a lot that he should have accomplished and did not accomplish. Because for a while there was a period of time many years ago where it looked like he and Roman Reigns were going to be those two faces of this modern generation of WWE to sort of lead the way. Maybe one on one brand, one on the other. Sort of what John Cena and Randy Orton, or John Cena and Batista were on Raw and SmackDown for a while in the mid-2000s. It looked like maybe we were on that path. Roman would be one guy, Bray would be the other. Roman went on to be the guy. Bray never was. I think there was a lot of potential there that went untapped. I think there were opportunities there with him that were squandered. But to say that, as you look back on his career, if he honestly felt that way, that, everything he had done was for nothing, and I mean, obviously that's nonsense. What he accomplished in his career is more than what most wrestlers who get into the business or even get into WWE will do. He got to be champion. He got to work with the top stars in the company. He got to do things. Some things worked, some things didn't work, but he got to do things that nobody else ever did. He put his own spin on things. He had his own ideas for how things should be and how his character should be portrayed. He led his own faction. Based on the reaction and the outpouring of support that he's gotten in the last few days, it's pretty clear that he impacted a lot of people all over the world. And I shared a story the other day when I talked about Bray on Thursday. I'm going to share it again now. But I think it's very kind of emblematic of the person that Bray was, and I love this story. But JTG wrote 2 books. And in the second book that he wrote, he shared a story about Bray Wyatt saving someone's life, actually saving multiple lives. But the story goes like this. One night, he and JTG are riding together to Monday Night Raw. Bray is driving. And there's another driver on the road who comes up behind them and nearly sideswipes them. Now, there's nobody in the lane next to them, so they're able to merge over, and if there was somebody in that other lane, then they would have hit that other car. Thankfully, there was nobody there. Now, Big E and Alex Riley are riding in another vehicle, and that same car that nearly hit them swipes them off the road. Well, now the shit's about to go down. And Bray speeds up after them, and the people in this other car, they're driving like maniacs down the road. So the car ends up flipping and rolling over about half a dozen times. The car is now upside down on its roof, and the car is smoking. And they hear cries coming from the car, and they can see that it's a bunch of teenagers inside, teenage girls trapped inside the car. Now, JTG does not want to go anywhere near this car because he's worried the fucking thing might blow up. Bray, on the other hand, doesn't hesitate. He runs over to the car. He pulls a girl out of the back window. He tried to pull the driver out. Her seatbelt was jammed, so he calls over to JTG to come over and help. He comes over. They pull the girl out. No thank you from the girls. Thank you for saving our lives. All they were worried about was, please don't tell our parents. Meanwhile, their car is upside down in the middle of the road. And JTG said they got back in their car. I assume they called the cops or whatever, but when they got back in their car to continue on to the arena, wherever they were going, wherever Raw was that night, outside of the conversation that the two of them had back in the car on the way to the building, he never one time heard Bray bring that story up again or brag about what he had done that day, saving their lives. Because he didn't do it for that reason. He didn't do it for publicity. He didn't do it for the jokes or the story. He did it because it was the right thing to do. It was just his natural instinct. Even though these people were driving like maniacs and could have killed somebody, he ran over to try to save their lives. That's the kind of person that Bray Wyatt was. And I extend my condolences to his friends and family. There were a lot of, obviously, wrestlers who were just heartbroken by what happened this week. Seth Rollins, I thought, was... he posted a video online and was about a 4-minute video. He got very emotional talking about something that Bray had said to him the last time they spoke about, looking after his baby girl. And that really got to Rollins because, again, it goes to the issue of family. And Bray having 4 kids himself that will never get to see him again is very sad stuff. John Cena is actually going to be coming back to SmackDown this Friday. I would expect him to have a few words to share about Bray as well. They work together quite a bit. I don't necessarily think the Bray Wyatt tributes are done just because SmackDown came and went. I'm sure there's going to be more this week. And I would expect Cena to probably have some things to say. He worked with Bray quite a bit, and they had that Firefly Funhouse match at WrestleMania a few years ago. When everything got shut down, and we got the Boneyard match on one night. We also got the Firefly Funhouse match. You think the early days of the Fiend was a trip? That match was basically it was like one of those dreams that you wake up from. That makes absolutely no sense, and you only vaguely remember bits and pieces of it, but you know that it was just this fucking wild dream. That's basically what the Firefly Funhouse match was. That is one of Bray's many contributions to the wrestling business. But he will be missed.